for brain measurements, you have you put like equipment is put on the head of a patient, right? And if you want to measure neuronal spike trains, they usually occur in some intervals. There is a spike, then there is pause, there is some spike, there is pause, and so on.
This is Slobodan Mitrović, a PhD candidate of the IT school at EPFL.
You get some measurements of those signals, but the question is, what actually, what are the actual spikes that happened in this in this process that gave you these measurements? And now you want to have some procedure which would take measurements from the equipment that you use and recover when these neuronal spikes actually occurred. Right? And for that you need some recovery algorithms that have insight in what way the equipment makes measurements, and then from the whole space of possible signals extract the one that actually corresponds to the measurements that you obtained. And to have everything running efficiently, very quickly, right, and preferably in real time, you need some recovery algorithms that are efficient.
Basically, when you're trying to track neural activity, you make a lot of measurements, but then you need an algorithm that will infer from the measurements what the neural activity likely was. Now, before Slobodan's work, there were already algorithms to do so, but such algorithms were slow.
What we designed is essentially linear time. If you have signal of length 1000, it essentially gives you the result in time which is proportional to 1000. So it's very quick in that sense. It's proportional to the time that you're using to perform the measurements.
This is so cool. But let's dig deeper into the details. What are the measurements like?
What you're getting is, if you plot time on the x-axis, it's taken in some small time intervals. Then at every, the way the signal looks at every time interval, you have some intensity. And you want to recover these intensities. You essentially assume that every x value corresponds to some time. There is some short spacing, maybe like 10 milliseconds or 50 milliseconds. And then every point on the x-axis corresponds to, let's say, 10 milliseconds, and you have intensity y. On the y-axis you would plot what was the value of that signal. But what you are getting with your equipment is not actually this. You are getting something, if you would, you are getting essentially, you have lots of sensors, and every sensor gets something. If something is closer to the sensor, like if there was a spike which was close to the sensor, the signal would be stronger, the signal would come faster. But if sensor is far from the spike, the signal would not be as strong to this sensor. So what you really have is like mix of measurements of these neuronal spikes. And now from this mix of measurements, you have, by mix I mean multiple sensors, and now from this mix of measurements you want to extract what actually was happening. Because one sensor cannot capture everything. It is more like one point on the sphere of your head, right? It's more like one point, and now at this point you're getting, from this point you're getting some measurements or what's actually happening inside your brain or where it fires. And then it depends on the distance, on the intensity, direction, and so on and so forth. But if you place multiple sensors, you get more clear picture of what's going on, but then you need some recovery methods to actually tell you what was the actual thing behind.
Now let's get back to this recovery problem. What was known before Slobodan's work?
You can formulate this problem as linear program, and we know that we can solve linear programs in polynomial time, that you can formulate this problem as linear program, and that you can essentially from this linear type of measurements, and if these measurements have something which is called restricted isometry property, if your measurements have that kind of property, essentially that they behave like sphere on sparse signals, then you can always reconstruct efficiently the given signal. And now once they show that you can always reconstruct efficiently, the question was, if I now tell you that signals are a specific form, can you do it even faster? And for many signals you can, and now we know that even for neuronal spike trains you can do it in near linear time.
So crucially, to determine a linear time algorithm, the key was to exploit the structure of the neural spike trains.
Exactly. And there are two sides. When you're doing measurements, so one is to put like, or more abstractly, to design matrix that has this special type of properties that essentially behaves like a sphere with respect to your signal of interest. So one side is to design this matrix, but now if you know that your signals are special, you can design smaller matrix. What that means? That means that if you know that your signals are special, you can use fewer sensors. Like you can always use too many sensors and get signal back efficiently. But right, can I use only 3 sensors as opposed to 30? Can I use 5? Right? That is also the question. And now, if I know that my signals have specific property, I can use fewer sensors. But now, it's even harder to decode the information if I have only few sensors. So to really get this information fully useful, you need procedures, recovery procedures that can exploit this additional structure. So it's two-sided. One side is how many sensors you need. The other side is, well, okay, if I now get information from even fewer sensors, can I recover efficiently this structure? And this is when to this side, recovery procedure, that is where I was looking at, and designing efficient algorithms that essentially, again, in the size of signal, almost in the time which is proportional to the size of signal, give you what is the actual signal. So if you were doing that for 5 minutes and you had, let's say, 50,000 time intervals proportional to 50,000, which is less than 1 second, of computation, it will recover the full signal from the measurements, which I believe is quite fast, right? Like 5 minutes measurements, and in 1 second you just get the full recovery. Once you actually feed the algorithm with the measurements, like in 1 second you get the full recovery back.
Now, if you're a biologist, you might be considering that this is merely a technological problem, but having efficient algorithms to analyze medical data is very much like having a quality telescope to look at the stars. This can hugely expand the realm of what can be known. In fact, now that we have Slobodan's algorithm, we can perhaps achieve more accurate real-time measurements to better analyze and understand neural activities.
That's a great point. So earlier, right, you needed somehow to make the trade-off between sensors or maybe to wait longer. But once you have this, you can actually play more and then use this additional result to get output in essentially real time. So yes, I mean that's definitely hopefully that will happen.
Good.
This comes back to this application in medical imaging that I mentioned, to magnetic resonance imaging, where I have an input signal and I get to measure the Fourier coefficients of that signal, then I want to reconstruct it. Sort of the sample complexity of a sparse Fourier transform algorithm is the number of points that I need to measure at in order to reconstruct my original signal.
We are talking here about graphs that have billions of edges, millions of nodes, and so it's really impossible to store them on one machine.